So today I am going to talk to you guys a little bit about ethics. So first of all, thank you for showing up. I know the weather is not very convenient right now, but I'm a firm believer that a huge percentage of success is attributed to just showing up. And so you guys showed up. So this is what you have to do when you get a job, when you do research, is to show up. So good job coming and being interactive. And I think that I want this to be engaging and fun and interesting. I find this topic very interesting. And so I want you guys to interact and to get to know myself and each other and your mentors throughout this. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes. I'm going to introduce, I guess, ethics and accountability and research to you guys, and then we're going to break up into groups with your mentors, and you guys are going to discuss more. So please feel free to jump in and to ask me questions. I'm going to try to keep this as interactive as possible. Can anybody name any of the people on these slides? Or who they are, their positions? Anyone? Yes? President of Harvard, very good. Claudine Gay, the bottom left lady, was the president of Harvard. Anyone else? Anyone else? Top left guy? Recognize that building, anyone? Anyone? Wild guess? I'm sorry? Stanford, president of Stanford, Mark Levine. How about the other two? Has anybody heard of behavioral economics? This field of research where there's these correlations between different things that you do. You've heard of this, like this Wonder Woman pose where you're supposed to stand like this and you're supposed to feel more confident, and you are more confident because you stand like that, from Amy Cuddy. Anybody's heard of this? So Danielle Arelli and Francesca Gino. So she was a professor at Harvard. He was a professor at MIT. So Harvard president, Stanford president, MIT professor, Harvard Business School professor. What do they have all in common? All top schools. What else? Yes? All scandals. Really, really bad scandals. If you're talking about accountability and research, they were all... I'm sorry?
I just thought it was going to be something good they all share in common.
Something good. Unfortunately, not for them, no. Something really bad. It was very scandalous. So I guess most recently, Claudine Gay was forced to resign from Harvard University when they found that several of her papers, including her dissertation, was plagiarized. So what's plagiarism? Anyone? I'm sorry? Copying other people's work without the proper citations. Yes. So this was just this January. This is all brand new stuff. I've been teaching like ethics in my biomedical engineering class for the last decade, and I usually talk about like ethics in research in terms of putting together institutional review boards, getting informed consent. But there's been all these cases of like gross like cheating and misconduct in research that I thought would be kind of juicy and scandalous, but I thought it would prompt some conversation about how do you actually do ethical research? How do you actually have accountability in your research? And so Mark Levine, president at Stanford University, fascinating story. He was at Alzheimer's research. He was head of Genentech, lots of like big products. He was accused of falsifying data. He claims he was forced to resign from Stanford University when a freshman at Stanford University actually broke the case, and he reported him. But he said he didn't know, right? Because he's president of Stanford, he's working at Genentech, he's doing all of these other things, and they said that he probably wasn't culpable in terms of being the one who manipulated the data, but how could he not have known, right? This is his research lab. These other two are super interesting. Oops. Let's go back. Oh, did you not have my slides in here? Oh no, I had like 6 slides. Can I hook up my laptop really quick or? I can just talk if not, but is it? All right, I'll just talk. So I had these fun slides on it. So, all right, so Daniel Morelli and Francesca Gino, right? These were behavioral scientists. So they wrote this really famous paper in 2012, published in one of the best journals in the country about honesty. Right? So they had this paper where they had this insurance company study where if you actually declared the number of miles that your car drove up front versus at the end of the document, they said that people were 10 times more honest about it than if they signed it at the end. So it turns out, so a bunch of guys, they're called data colada. So there's these 3 professors from around the country. They started they couldn't believe all of these kind of interesting this field of behavioral science was really burgeoning, and lots of people getting these really remarkably big papers because they were finding these correlations. So these guys were like, these correlations sound a little too good to be true, right? Like this study by Morelli, and he's written, if you Google him, he's written all of these best-selling books, very fun types of books that has to do with statistics and behavioral economics. And Francesca Gino, he's just like, well, how could this be? There's just all of these papers coming out that seem like a little bit too good to be true. And so they published this parody paper because they did what was known as p-hacking. Does anybody want to know what p-values are? So in statistics, we're going to go over a little bit of statistics when we get into intro and research. But this is regardless of what field you are, right? So you have the null hypothesis that 2 groups are not the same. And so statistically, if you have a p-value of less than 0.05, right, statistically, they will statistically not be similar, right? So that null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is void. So that means they are statistically significant. So these guys have figured out that if you just take a whole bunch of different variables, right? You screen a whole bunch of variables, you're going to find some correlation in something. And that's what these behavioral scientists were reporting, right? And people said they kind of likened it to jaywalking, right? It didn't think it was such a bad deal. You just screen lots and lots of variables until you find some sort of correlation. So these guys, this data colada group, decided that they were going to publish this paper that actually showed that mathematically you can show that if you listen to a Beatles song, you actually age in reverse. And they actually published it showing that p-hacking can accomplish such ridiculous statistics as this. But it got them investigating a lot of the behavioral science work that was coming out. And what they found with Morelli and Gino was something even more serious than p-hacking, that they were actually taking and manipulating data that the data that they got looked nothing like the data that after they had manipulated them, right? So in research, when you do research, you have to talk about your sample size. You cannot cherry pick your data, right? You just say, I'm going to collect 50 subjects. You report the data from the 50 subjects. You don't say, oh, well, this one's an outlier. I'm just going to not include this guy, right? You have to include everything. You have to say what you're looking at, what the group you're studying is, and then what is the statistical value, right? Is p less than 0.05? What is your sample size, your power, and all of the details that go with that. But they found that a lot of these very, very big papers were not doing that. So it really calls into question, well, how do you actually do good science or good research in general? Because then this is not just science, right? This goes with any field of quantitative research. Right? And I mean, President Gay was not a scientist. She was, I think she was a social scientist, actually. But you still, there are strict rules in research as to what is allowable and what is now not allowable, right? So can anyone tell me how you cite somebody else's research? Have you heard of citing somebody's research? So you're going to read research, right? You're going to read ideas. You're going to come up with ideas. And guess what? Very few ideas, I would say probably arguably no ideas that you're going to have for your research came out of a vacuum. You're not the first person to invent this idea, not the first person to do this type of research. Other people have done it before you, right? And you need to say what other people have done. And that's okay, right? Like nobody ever thought that you're inventing all of this from nothing. That's completely okay. What is not okay is to claim that what they wrote is, in fact, your work, right? And so after you cite something, a fact, a number, a statistic, you put in parentheses, right? You put a footnote and you cite. And there's different formats on how to do citing. We can go into that at a different lecture. You cite their journal article that you pulled this from. So if you miss doing that, that is plagiarism. And there's lots of software. There's like no reason nowadays to have the excuse, oh, I didn't know, or I was just like cut and pasted and I didn't know. If you have more than 5 words in a row that is copied from somebody else, you cite them. Right? Otherwise, it's plagiarism. Turn it in, Grammarly, they will all check for this. So you can actually see to make sure that you don't accidentally plagiarize. It's a big, big no-no. It's a big offense in research. Right? Manipulating data. So you never just throw out data. You talk about your inclusion and your exclusion criteria. Right? So what data, there is some data that you may not show. Maybe data is really crappy that you got from certain populations, right? So we excluded all populations who had, blood pressure levels, systolic levels over 150, right? They were hypertensive. We excluded them because that's beyond the scope of this project. That is completely okay. You can take out all of that, but you need to define the set that you're including. You can't just take out, well, I'm going to take out this one piece because that throws off my curve, right? So there's no doing any of that. Any of that is considered data manipulation. He was actually caught for, so the student, I think his picture is in here. He got this really big journalism award for taking down the president of the university. He actually found that he was doctoring the figures in his research. The power, right? He was a freshman undergraduate when he took down the president of Stanford University. So you guys are very powerful. Just use your power for good is what I'm asking you. And that's kind of the theme of this lecture today. So, general guidelines. If you don't know, I always tell my students, if you don't know, you ask, right? If you're not sure if it's okay to exclude a certain population or to not include this portion, you ask, right? If you're not sure, I always say err on the side of oversighting than underciting other people. So make sure you have a thorough list in your reference list. Right? Make sure you don't copy more than 5 words in a row to be accused of plagiarism. And you never manipulate data. You never just manually move the data around until you get the curve that you want, right? Big no-nos. Any questions? So this is one aspect. This is really just, and then, in terms of accountability, if you do make that mistake, right? If you published a paper, and I tell my students this all the time, if you published a paper and then you realize, oh, I made a huge mistake, right? The calculations don't actually work out. I can't actually reproduce this. You can retract your paper. It is way better to retract your paper than to have somebody retract it for you. So it's okay. People make mistakes. It happens. But own up to it, right? That's the whole part of being honest about it. Mistakes happen. Mistakes happen all the time in research. That is 100% okay, right? But the whole point of research, right? What's the point of publishing? Anyone know the point of publishing? So publishing is the language of doing research. It doesn't matter what field you're in, right? When you do research, you publish. And the point of publishing is so that other people can replicate your work and then build on your work, right? Because that's how we build up, that's how we make progress in society, that's how we make progress in science. We stand on the shoulders of giants, for those who came before us. If your research is not reproducible, if you don't put enough in your paper so that people can reproduce it, It's not good. It's not good research, right? So people, the goal is to have other people be able to reproduce and cite your work. So you get to be a more famous researcher when more people cite your work. And people track this. It's called H-index. You can look up H-indexes of your different professors and see where they fall in how often they get cited. So there is tracking of this, right? Another thing, I was on a disciplinary committee. I served on one of my field's disciplinary committees for a guy who you get asked to review papers. After you start writing papers, you get asked to review papers. And there was a very famous professor who had lots and lots of citations, like so many citations. And then the society started investigating him and asked me to be on the investigative team to actually understand what was going on here. What he would do is he would review people's papers and insist that they cite his work whenever, in order for them to publish, even if it was not related to his work. And then if you start looking at his papers, he was citing his own work constantly. So he got a very large number of citations, and so that drove his H-index because he was forcing people. He was basically blackmailing you. If you don't cite my work, I'm not going to publish your work. So there's like lots and lots of crazy stuff going on there, right? Don't be those types of researchers, right? And the other big part of this is you have to speak up, right? So it's really scary if you're starting out and you think that somebody is not being honest. Maybe it's a PI in a lab, maybe it's a collaborator. If you think that the data looks wonky to you, you got to speak up, right? Like that's how Data Colada brought down some of these people. That's how this student recognized that there was something going on. There was a lot of people apparently who kind of knew and there was talk of it, but everybody was too afraid to actually speak up and say something, right? So that takes, that takes a lot of guts to be able to stand up and report somebody. But these are the types of researchers that we're trying to build here at UCI, and it's completely possible. I had lunch this on Saturday with Nobel Prize laureate. He was a graduate student here in chemistry, and he just won a 2021 Nobel Prize in chemistry, and he's now the chair of chemistry at Princeton University. And he let me carry his Nobel Prize. I had a picture of it. I thought that was good. I was gonna look so cool carrying a Nobel Prize, but I look like this starstruck little 13-year-old girl meeting like a rock star for the first time. But the point is, we build very good researchers here. You guys may go on to win a Nobel Prize, and this is the foundation that I want you to build it on. It's one of honesty. It's one of keeping track of all of your data. So your data should be transparent. Now the NIH and the NSF, all these funding bodies that fund research are getting smart to all of this. They're like, well, we don't want these ridiculous papers with these crazy correlations because people are just looking for correlations. We want strong science. So they're making everybody upload the data set. So you can actually get loads and loads of data. If you are a data scientist, it's excellent. There's so many open source data sources that you can go to. The NIH has repositories of them, and you can comb through the data and look through the data and start doing your own research on it. So data is becoming open source, right? People are releasing their data so other people can play with the data and find interesting correlations and do interesting things with them and reproduce the data that they produce. They don't want to let you produce papers anymore if you can't share your data so that people know that it is in fact honest. So these are types of the reforms that are happening in the research world now because there's been a lot of scandals lately. Is that a good point? I know the mentors are waiting. Is that a good point? I'm happy to discuss more. I think I'm doing another lecture soon on getting into research and finding your research topics so we can cover more about how to do those paper searches and stuff and citations. Sound good? Questions? All right. Well, you can ask your mentors. Thanks.